Because if you go and just say, I want to do power exchange, well, that can look different. Like, and if you're new to it, you don't want any, like, someone to misconstrue what you're saying. Like, for them, power exchange might be like, ooh, yay, I get to lock her in the basement. And you can be like, whoa, it's not what I wanted. You know, like, maybe so that's a reason why.
They're out. If they're not going to go in the basement willingly, they're out.
I know, right? Pussy.
I'm Mr. Michael, and it's time for another episode of the Kink Tank. This topic we're featuring is changing power dynamics, which is a very important topic, not just for people beginning to get into BDSM in their current relationship, but also for those in established kink relationships that are growing or changing. So what do you do when the power chemistry between two people is changing? What are some of the challenges and solutions to keeping everyone happy during a transition? Is there always a happy solution? Listen in on our panel and tell us what you think by visiting our website at thekinktank.com and commenting on any of our social media posts. Now let us get the show rolling with Changing Power Dynamics. Okay, and we're live at the Kink Tank episode 6, I think, which is Changing Power Dynamics. And we have our esteemed guests here tonight. So this was suggested actually by Josie, who's with us tonight. So she's going to do all the talking.
Oh,
yeah. I liked this topic because I thought that there was an awful lot of meat on it. Actually, maybe too much meat in that I think there's a whole different discussion that we'll probably try and tackle maybe at a different time, which is changing your personal power orientation. But what I'd like to try and talk about here is changing power dynamics between people in relationships. And then as far as, you know, changing labels or changing your own personal power orientation, I think that's probably a discussion unto itself. So I know when I put the title out there of this little talk that we were going to have, people were confused. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean like switching in the middle of a scene? Yeah, it could be. Does it mean between long-term monogamous couples introducing kink? Yes, I want that to be part of the conversation too. There are a lot of different aspects of it, and I guess that's why I felt like there was a lot of meat to talk about here. So I think the first one is maybe we should talk about existing relationships who find kink, who come into the kinky community or come into a kink relationship from a, let's say, vanilla perspective. They've either just found this together or it's been on their mind for a long time, or one of them is trying to convince the other that this is the way to be. I mean, it could happen a number of ways, but you know, I want to talk about the reasons people are reluctant, some of the potholes and problems. So, who wants to start?
Oh, you know, I'm always willing to do that.
Take it. You got the dead air. Run with it.
Well, the one that I've always found interesting, because maybe it's just a function of language, but you keep talking about, like, kink and all that kind of stuff. Like, based on the title, the one thing I've always found interesting was listening to people talk about introducing power exchange into a traditionally vanilla relationship. Especially a relationship that has had a long-standing basis. You know, so people have been together for a long time in a more traditional sort of even power exchange type of relationship or an even relationship. To try and introduce power exchange, it always seems to have more complications. Like starting fresh seems to be much easier than introducing it after the fact.
Okay. Is it possible to do that? I mean, do you think that that's a recipe that dooms you to failure to try and bring an official sort of negotiated power exchange into what was otherwise an egalitarian arrangement?
Well, I have seen it done, so I think that it can be done. But I don't think it's as easy as people think, because I think the problem that I have seen, the largest thing is that people tend to assume roles that they're not comfortable with. So typically you will see somebody who's interested in power exchange, either from the top or from the bottom, want to introduce that, from their own perspective of the power exchange. So you'll see somebody who's a bottom who wants somebody to be dominant, and the person may agree to do it, but they're not really a dominant personality in sort of the traditional kink sense.
So their partner number two in this case gets their power orientation basically from their partner. Well,
yeah, kind of assigned to them, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, he's the submissive, so I have to be the dominant, or she's the dominant, so I need to be the submissive, or
right. And I think part of the problem there is, one, it's not necessarily a role that fits comfortably with that person.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's sort of outside of their normal. Because I see a lot of people who might identify as both submissive, who try to take on this role of the dominant. I have found that kink is actually easier, from what I have seen, to inject into a vanilla relationship, because people can call that sexually adventurous, and there's a lot less hang-up about who's doing what to whom.
Mm-hmm.
It's really more of an exploration. What the hell was that?
Is that my computer? That's Josie's computer.
I don't know what that is.
That's a Hangouts, like somebody trying to call somebody on a Hangout.
Well, it's not me. I don't even know how to do that.
That's okay.
That's technology, man. No, I think that's a good point that you're making, though. I think it can happen I think it comes with a different set of difficulties. So when a historically vanilla couple tries it, and then someone who's already established in a kink relationship, I think it can still be just as difficult and just as many hang-ups. But I think that's a really good point, because I think for some people, it's just a semantic issue. It's the terminology. It's not so much the action. So you don't have to negotiate this, top, bottom, who's the dominant, who's the submissive. If it's more of a physical, like, kink thing, then you can just say, well, I'm
whatever
gonna,
sounds fun.
Thank you. I'm going to do... Yeah, it's like an action versus a title.
Yeah. But the thing that's really interesting is that when we talk about power exchange, I don't even think it's the matter of assuming a role. Like, let's just say, okay, I'm going to be the submissive. That's what I'm interested in, so you, by default, have to be the dominant. It's that the person who asks for it generally has this idea of how it should look, and so tries to mold partner number two to fit whatever their vision is.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what I'm saying? As opposed to, when we meet people looking for kinky relationships, people get to see kind of our kinky selves and see if their style of being a dominant fits with the submissive style of being submissive. You know, understand what I'm saying? So there are some a submissive who might say, oh, I'm really interested in kink and I want you to do this and I want to be punished and blah, blah, blah. But you may have a dominant who finds, I'm perfectly willing to be the dominant, but I don't believe in punishments.
Mm-hmm. And
so they don't fit the model that the person who has suggested this already has in mind.
And do you think that maybe that's because, so there are two ways to go about that, right? I mean, you can go to a person and say, I want you to do this specific thing, and this specific thing. Like, I want you to I want to do services for you, and then you can list off what they are. I want to have, whatever it is that you want to do. Or you can go to that person and say, hey, I'd like to get into a power exchange relationship. That's really broad. And I feel like some people might go about it that other way, that here's XYZ, like that very specific thing, just to avoid confusion, just to open up the dialogue. Because if you go and just say, I want to do power exchange, well, that can look different. And if you're new to it, you don't want someone to misconstrue what you're saying. For them, power exchange might be ooh, yay, I get to lock her in the basement. And you can be like, whoa, it's not what I wanted. Maybe, so that's a reason why.
They're out. If they're not going to go in the basement willingly, they're out.
I know, right? Pussy.
Well, that does, that's part of the problem that I see with some of these transitions that people are making from a more vanilla arrangement, or let's say less explicit power exchange, that, they might, everybody in our community has different ideas about what kink is. And the chances that these two people that have, let's say, been married for 10 years now, they've never really talked about it up until even the last year or so, for whatever reason, afraid to talk about it, not sure of the judgment of the other person, but somehow they both come to this, hey, you're into that too? Okay, I'm into that. But what are the odds that since they match up in their vanilla married life and have happily for several years, that their kinks are going to line up? Either that the play that they want is similar, or that the type, is a service relationship versus a play relationship. What are the odds, and what kind of friction does that cause? Or do they, well, we're already together, so I guess we're going to have to make it work. So I guess I'll do this for you if you do that for me.
Yeah, and you see a lot of that. You see, I mean, one of the things that I have seen is that, it's interesting. I think this is a really interesting topic after last week's, because we were talking about consent, which of course had a lot of discussion about negotiation. And I think what's really fascinating about it is that vanilla people get into this and they don't have the toolbox for negotiating what they want. Mm-hmm. They don't have, excuse me, the language in terms of expressing what they're interested in, but they also, I don't think, have the capacity, as well as some, for listening non-judgmentally. To listen to what people are saying, oh, you're kinky, I would love to, put you in a pig mask and have you walk around the house on all fours like in the commercial. And somebody's like, whoa, like, I don't know where you're coming from, but that's not what I had in mind.
Yeah, that's not kink. My kink is something else.
Yeah, and I think that we as kinky people who have been around for a minute anyway, who have done some negotiating either in terms of relationships or in terms of play, just have a broader range of communication skills for sort of navigating those waters. To be able to say, well, do you mean this? Or is this what you're looking for? As opposed to, oh, you want to be spanked. Okay, I'll spank you. And it's like, well, wait, you're doing it wrong.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, I see that quite a bit, actually. Not necessarily just strictly from vanilla people coming in to kink for the first time, but, the idea that there's a way to do this. Somebody, I envision it that it happens this way. One person is wildly into this, on the down low. For whatever reason, they don't share this with their partner. They've been reading, they've been watching the porn, they've been on FetLife, they've been, gathering all of this information, and they've come to the conclusion that this is how people do it. This is the right way, the true way. And then, so when it comes time to have this discussion with their partner, it's, a very clear picture of not just what I want, but if we're going to do this correctly, then this is the way it has to be. And that is, first of all, I'm the male, so I obviously have to be the dominant. Mm-hmm. Second of all, if you're going to serve me, you must also take a beating from me. That all those misconceptions, I guess, about relationships and power dynamics. And unless they find other people who do this, I don't see much chance of that succeeding. Either they're going to have to reset and throw all of that out and say, all right, well, that didn't work. We're going to go back to vanilla.
Yeah, and I think people just quit. That's the problem. If they can't make it work right away, they just like, well, that didn't work.
Mm-hmm. Right. But I think if they had, if they were to get further into it together, or surround themselves with good models of relationships, meeting people, going out to events. And I'm not even saying munches or anything like that. I'm talking about fetish events at the local bar, or or some of the national events that are out there, or even just participating online. I mean, there's a lot. But if you just say, all right, well, I've done all the research and this is how it's supposed to be, so this is how we're going to set up our relationship, I just don't see that having a high chance of success. So either go ahead, Megan.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. I'm done.
I've never really been in a vanilla relationship specifically, but the first one that I was in where we tried to make a clear definition from just being kinky to a power exchange. We didn't really have the language for it, like you were saying. And ultimately, we didn't really know what each other wanted, and the relationship kind of ended up just failing because we didn't know what to ask for, what to look for, and the more we learned, the more we realized, I want this. Well, I really want this, but it should be going like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think even when you have the tools, it's still a difficult conversation, though. I mean, I think it can be just as hard, too, when you're in an established kink-based relationship. I think it can be just as hard, sometimes even harder, because you feel like for a lot of people, their kink is kind of like their sexual orientation, and you would never go to someone who's, you know, it would be difficult to go to someone who's straight and say, hey, you know, how would you like to change this?
Mm-hmm.
That's
one
a
of the
hard
things,
conversation. I
How
mean,
about we
it's really
both be
hard. I don't know that.
Let's both be bisexual. I heard that's more fun. We should do that.
well, no,
Right.
but Michael, I think this is a really interesting segue, because one of the things that I've really seen dealing with the topic directly is I have seen dominants who, even though they don't want to mess with their power exchange, have decided they want to try bottoming in terms of just like the sensation or the play,
Mm-hmm.
and it messes with the dynamic. Like it's does some really weird things, like whether the bottom loses respect or whatever else. And that's one of those really weird things, because the power exchange is so well established,
Mm-hmm.
that a change that power exchange really throws things into a spin.
I've been told that before. I've been told that if a partner of mine, you know, certain partners that I've had before, that if they were to see that they would probably lose something for me, and it's unfortunate, but I don't necessarily think that's. I think it's natural for some people's feelings of submission. I don't know that it's something that, because that sounds like somebody that's pretty shallow, right? I mean, just
Well, yes and no, but I think
first
that
glance.
No, I don't think that's fair to say that they're shallow.
I'm
Well, no,
saying
but
it looks that way,
It's a
but I
conversation.
don't feel like it is. Go ahead, Shane.
But what I was saying is that I think the problem, and we see this a lot in kink, is there are just people who take kink in general very seriously in their lives. And I think that what people perceive is that, you know, I'm a full-time submissive, or I identify as a slave. And it's so core to my sort of personal view, to my ego,
Mm-hmm.
that my expectation is that you are my full-time, all-the-time dominant. And if you know, kind of mess with my vision of you, it's messing with my self-perception.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's where a lot of that gets tangled up.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, too, that some of this can be, like, these relationships are a lot more fragile than I think anybody ever really realized. Like, we're so good at talking about consent and talking about, you know, negotiation and talking about communication. Like, we're really strong in those things, or at least a lot of people are. But these dynamics can be a lot more fragile even though we do have those skills. I know that, I mean, I'm in established relationships that have full knowledge and involvement in kink communities, but it still wigs me out a little to go to those individuals and say, you know, I'd like to make this change. And it's a difficult conversation to have, because in a regular relationship, in a standard traditional non-kink based relationship where you can see on TV, you can see your friends, you can see like where pitfalls are going to come in those relationships and those conversations, because you have examples of them. But in this, I mean, you don't really have examples of them, so you're not really sure what will be that magic bullet that will be like this amazing, great thing, or this really horrible like straw that broke the camel's back, and that's scary.
Yeah. What were you going to say about when we talked about that?
Oh, just the idea of you bottoming would change my opinion on you.
Right.
And it may sound shallow, it may, but if that's what I signed up for, that's what I'm expecting.
Yeah, and I mean that I feel strongly like I understand why that is.
Mm-hmm.
But sort of in this like PC world, if you're feeling that way, you might be tempted to feel like, well, that's shallow of me, you know. But it's when we're dealing with power exchange like this, I fully understand why it is that somebody would lose their sense of authority from me, seeing me bottom for someone else.
Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, well,
And
are you going to tell me what to do if you're going to let someone else tell you what to do?
There's a certain facade or a certain idea of, you know, power and control, and you don't want to see you don't want to see the other side. Even if there is another side, it might even be like, you know, whatever you want to do, just not in front of me, because that'll, you know, hurt my fantasy image of you. I hope that people feel free to explore these things, but I do understand why that can be problematic and why that can change dynamics. And that dynamic meaning I've lost something for this relationship.
I've seen a lot of that. I've seen a lot of bottoms, or at least certainly heard on the periphery of a lot of bottoms who've been put in that situation, and it's amazing how prevalent that is as an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think there's like it's uncomfortable in that way, but it can also be uncomfortable in that with that change comes a whole new set of things to be jealous about or to have to manage feelings about. So now, not only do I have to be like, you know, making sure I know how I feel about you dating someone else, now I have to be cool with you bottoming to someone else, and then there's a potential that I'm going to be jealous because you look like you're having fun with that person in this kind of play I've never seen you experience before, or what if you're a better submissive than me? Like, how weird is that, to be, like, jealous that you're an awesome submissive, but I'm submissive to you, and that shit is crazy, but it could totally happen.
Another one that I've actually seen that's really interesting is this dynamic, which is if I'm a top and I have a bottom and I decide I'm going to bottom to somebody else, is there a chain of command that is established?
That was going to be my point, that somehow the person that you're bottoming to is going to assume some kind of control over me. And, you know, there are people that might assume that. And that could be dangerous to a relationship. And in the wrong hands, that could actually become a problem. I think, you know, when it comes back to vanilla relationships sort of turning kinky, I think I've realized, because I was trying to think of examples that I've seen of people that have come into the community as a vanilla couple who have successfully made the transition to a power exchange that at least appears to me to be enjoyable, successful, and, you know, worthwhile. And the more I know about these people, I think I see higher success rates with people who already have some sort of power exchange beforehand.
Yeah, well, there's a difference, though, between putting a name to something that's already there and trying to establish something that's, you know, an already sort of more egalitarian, to use your word, situation.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I think that's the way what I was trying to say was, it seems like the horse before the cart if you're just putting a name on something that's already there, or, you know, rather than the other way around, you're trying to make your relationship into something else.
So because we're doing this with the supposition that people will be watching this,
mm-hmm.
Our observation then is that we typically see more success with vanilla couples who interject kink into the relationship when they're really adding kink, when the power exchange is sort of already established, when they both go, hey, we're kinky, I'm a top, wow, that's great, I'm a bottom, and they go from there.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, in my observations, because I was trying to think, I'm like, you know, I have seen people do that successfully. And I was trying to, but I've also seen it done unsuccessfully. And usually the way that it goes down in the community that I've observed is that there is clearly one person in this vanilla relationship that kink is very important to, and the other one seems to be coming along for the ride.
Yeah.
That if they want to keep this person, they've understood that they have to do this. So their power orientation has been chosen for them. They don't seem to have their heart in it. It's more like they're the kind of person that's inclined to ask you, you know, how do you do this? You know, teach me, train me to be a good dominant. Well, man, it's like there's a recipe for this that, you know, a good dominant does this and does that rather than is this or is that. And so,
yeah, and it's interesting because I was kind of thinking of the same example, but I've also seen it where people who have been put in the position of being the bottom have felt really put upon, in the sense like, you have to do this because you're the bottom.
Right.
Like there's a sort of implied pressure. And
there's, I think, in the people that I have observed, there's a fear of abandonment there, in that if I'm not his boss, since this is something that he wants to do or she wants to do, if I don't go along with this, if I don't submit, bottom, be their slave, etc., that I'm going to lose this relationship. Yeah, that they're not going to have a person. And the sad truth of it, I guess, is that the ones where I see that happening, they do split up.
Yeah, but Michael, hold on. What I find really interesting is I don't disagree with you at all, But what I find fascinating is that the people who try it and aren't successful almost invariably break up anyway.
Right.
Because they realize that this is more important to me as a person than my relationship is.
Yes. One person, they both come into it. One person is a kid in a candy store and goes running off with it, and the other one is being dragged behind them. And
yeah, what's fascinating about that is, to me, is, like I said, you sort of see your logic of, if I don't do this, I'll lose my partner, is probably more true than we care to admit.
Probably. And that has to be a scary thing when you've had an otherwise functional and happy vanilla relationship, possibly for quite a long time, or
Well,
marriage for 20 years, or I mean, I don't think that you can say, well, obviously the one partner's been kinky all of this time and the other partner never was, so it was doomed from the beginning, you know, or that they thought they were happy but they really weren't. I don't know if you can say that. Once, I think sometimes people discover this.
Well, yeah, but my point is I don't think they can go back to being happy without it.
Right. I agree with that.
Yeah.
At least for the one person who feels like this is the key, the answer to everything that they've been, you know, either the solution to all their problems that they're having or the key to their personal happiness.
Well, I mean, we're talking a lot about ways that it is not, ways that it doesn't work, the don't do's, the ways that it can be bad, but it's not always bad. I mean, I think the vast majority of us were in vanilla relationships at one point, and somehow we found a way to make it functional. So I wonder,
Josie,
you know,
I don't mean to interrupt, but we all started with vanilla relationships, but I'm not in those relationships anymore.
no, but I'm just saying, I mean, there has to be a way. I mean, it does work for some people. So, I mean, can we think of any ways that we have seen it be successful, like any ways of approaching that conversation that have been productive? I mean, is it just being involved has been helpful, or?
I think my opinion is that people who have gotten their partners engaged from the beginning. The thing that I've seen, and I think Michael made the point as well, is that people who come in with a very, very clear idea of how it should be tend to suffer more. I think when people have an exposure to it and involve their partner right away, tend to be able to have better conversations because they are less set in their expectations.
They can learn about kink together and sort of therefore
as
be more on the
opposed to
same
being
page.
taught one person's version of it.
Yeah, and possibly being blindsided by that, where I've been interested in this for a long time. I've been hiding it from you because I'm not sure how you're going to react.
Which is interesting because I think that outlines a bigger problem in the relationship.
You're probably right.
You know, a lack of transparency, lack of honesty, all those things that we worry about in relationships.
Right, but back to what Josie's saying is we've talked about numerous ways that this can't work. And obviously sometimes it does work. And I don't know if it's, you know, a percentage, if we have any stats to back this up. I see from our community anyways, I think I probably have a misrepresented idea of how successful this is, because I think sometimes when it's unsuccessful, we just don't see them anymore.
Yeah, a lot of cases.
And I have to make assumptions, you know, well, I don't know. Are they living a happy kink life together happily ever after now? Or did this, you know, set the whole thing on fire and they went straight down the tube? I don't know.
Well, I'm thinking of one couple off the top of my head who are in a long-term relationship, older than I am, and got into it, and in kind of a statistically less likely dynamic with a male submissive who introduced the idea to his wife, and we don't see them much anymore, but they are happy as frickin' clams.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it was one of those things where he introduced it to her, and she really took to it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I don't know and oddly, I don't think that was an existing dynamic. I think it was very, very egalitarian. And he basically said, this is what I'm interested in. And apparently he'd been interested in it for years, probably even before they got together, and had really squashed that for himself. Not for the sake of the relationship, but, you know, for the sake of having relationships. You know, presuming this is just something you don't talk about. Because, again, they're older people. But, yeah, now they're just, you know, we don't see them as much because they're busy and they've got life going on and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, peas in a pod.
Yeah, I think you can probably assume in that case that the woman in this scenario had some sort of natural proclivity or natural interest where, you know, maybe it's something that she had thought about or fantasized about or heard about or something, didn't really think it was appropriate for her relationship until her person said, I would love to do it this way. Where instead of creating a light bulb for her, it just lit the light bulb up, you know.
Well, can I tell you, again, this is just observation based on my conversations with them, but I think it really did light the light bulb. Like, I think this was something she was completely oblivious to until he brought it up. And then when presented with it was just like, this is a thing?
Right. But I mean lighting the light bulb as opposed to creating the light bulb. You know, the light bulb was already there.
I don't think it was anything she'd ever considered.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, literally, I mean, like, the whole idea of kink and power exchange was something that never passed through her transom.
I guess he struck it really lucky then, huh?
Yeah. I mean, maybe, but just, and she just loves it.
So
what about when one partner is vanilla and one partner is pretty established in the kink community? Is that different?
How does that happen? I guess because
well, I think that I was in a relationship with somebody who was, by most accounts when I met them, a fairly vanilla person, and you know, I was not at all, and I think that it was completely different because, well, I think part of it was different because I had the tools, you know, like what Shane was talking about, because I've been around. I mean, I know the language, and I'm pretty open-minded. So, and I was also totally comfortable with the answer being, whoa, yeah, no, crazy woman. Like, I was totally okay with that being the answer, so maybe that made me brave enough to broach the subject. But I went to that individual and just kind of described a sort of dynamic that I was interested in, and I didn't go with any, like, details, and then I just said, okay, you know, want to try it out. And then there was kind of this process of trial and error. And I feel like, is that also applicable to two vanilla people, or was that only possible because I was not vanilla at the outset?
Right. So you bring up an interesting scenario here, because I thought you were talking about two people who have had an existing relationship. One person is heavily involved, and I was like, what, are they sneaking around? They've been like...
No.
Okay. So you mean meeting a vanilla person. They've never considered kink before.
Right.
You're already well on your way in your understanding of it.
Yeah.
Okay. I have an idea there. I think, like, it's kind of hard to explain, but if you're already established in the community and you're looking outside of the community for that type of relationship, there's almost those, like, very subtle characteristics of people's personality that you can pick up on. Like, do they pick where you want to go out to eat? Do they tell you very, very minor things to do that show that they may have that type of dominant characteristic in them? Or do they want you to make all the decisions? So you kind of can, since you know what those tools and what those words are, you kind of can look for that out in the wild. Like, you can kind of look and see if they have...
There's no doubt that's why, you know, that was a compatibility thing for us. No doubt that I was attracted to that person because I saw something in that person that maybe they had never picked up on.
I will stereotype the fuck out of it. Back in the day, there was a couple here that moved, I'll try not to out them. They moved to Arizona and used to come to the mix a lot, celebrated her birthday there and was beaten with bacon.
All right, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Is really into, one of her kinks is being a cougar. She loves younger men. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's fascinating, because they're poly, is that she has met and had relationships with guys that she thought had the potential to be good dominants, and brought them along to play dominant to her submissive.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're picking up on a strategy that I think, you know, for people, because this is a question all the time. Any forum and any BDSM related, you know, kink-based blog or internet troll anywhere, like you see them all the time. They're like, you know, I'm kind of interested in this. How do I get my wife to be interested in it? This is a very common question. I don't think all of them are trolls. I think a lot of them have like a legitimate, like, I don't know what to do. And I feel like this is one of those strategies. Like, if you think that they might be interested because, you know, you've noticed something in them, or you just really would love to try it with them because you're attracted to them in that way, I feel like you can do this. You can kind of take the strings that you already see that are there and do your research and then just try to connect them, like, really subtly, like not trying to prescribe everything.
Them?
What?
So basically manipulate them?
Well, I think it's kind of guiding them in a direction you'd like to go, Shane. I think that's the better way.
I'll just take that as a yes. That was a lot of words that equaled yes.
No, was it?
No, I understand what Josie's saying. I mean, you can come out and ask and spook the person away, or you can finesse it in, and hey. I don't necessarily call that manipulation.
Yes.
Hey.
Finesse is not Shane's long suit, but
no. Like I said, I'll stereotype this. If I'm going to hit on vanilla girls, I try to make sure they have tattoos and piercings first, because they generally have a masochistic streak that they may not be familiar with.
I see. Let me pause here just for a moment. We have quite a few viewers tonight, and I'm really glad to see that. I wanted to let everybody know that they can submit questions to be answered by our panel here.
Or dominant questions.
Or, yes, they can dominant questions to us. And let us know if there's something that you would like to have addressed on the panel. Let me see if I can get my funky graphic to show you where... I think there is a button. You see that little arrow there on your screen? There's a button somewhere in that general vicinity up here that is the button that you can use to submit your questions. So we're going to be continuing our discussions here. If you'd like to ask something in particular, feel free to do that, and we'll try to work that into our conversation. There was something that brought... Oh, here's a thing that I've seen when we're talking about changing power dynamics. I read Reddit a lot, and in the BDSM and BDSM community Reddits there's a question that maybe I just notice it more than the other questions. There are a lot of new people questions, and that's great to see, but a lot of them, it's even a detail in the phrasing, and that is, how can I get my girlfriend to dominate me? How can I make my boyfriend be my dominant? And when I hear it asked like that, I have to chuckle a little bit inside, and I feel like you're already completely on the wrong track, and there is no hope for you at all.
You should give up your mom.
Yeah, if that's the way you're approaching this, if the way that you're approaching is, how can I get my girlfriend to dominate me? Like, how can I trick her into dominating me is what it sounds like.
Well, not just that, Michael, but there's some other implications there that concern me, which is, I know what you're talking about. I've seen those kinds of things on various other sites. Mm-hmm. And what concerns me about that is that these people are typically using language that they are familiar with. Mm-hmm. And they're typically talking about partners who don't have that language, which to me implies this is a person who was kinky, who for some reason or another got into a vanilla relationship and wants to turn that into a kinky relationship. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you know what? You can't start with one thing knowing how you are going in and expect to have it change your way. You know what I mean? You know, I've seen this oddly enough, and I don't know why, but this is usually these really bad relationships that turn into vanilla relationships because kinky person slept with a vanilla person and someone made a baby, and now they're stuck together and they can't get divorced. I'm not joking. Okay. Right? And so they're like, I'm stuck in this relationship. And you hear people say that all the time. I'm stuck in this relationship. How can I make the relationship better for me?
I feel like that's kind of a worst case scenario way to look at it, though. I think there are plenty of people who maybe knew that they were kinky, left the community, or just, took a hiatus, didn't have a good partner, met a vanilla person, liked vanilla person, and then, a couple years down the road was like, hey, I'm kind of missing that. I'm kind of jonesing for that. Mm-hmm. I think it's still possible for that to be like a functional, that could happen, and nobody was lying, nobody was being shady. It's just,
well, I'm not saying anybody was shady. I'm just saying that people tend to get into these relationships, like, I don't know where to look for a kinky relationship, even though I spend all of my time looking at kinky porn. Maybe they don't go to Munches, maybe they don't do that, but they know that they're kinky. And because they don't have a resource for finding kinky partners, they just do the traditional dating thing, meet people in bars, meet people from work, book of the month club, whatever it happens to be, and form a relationship and say, how do I get my partner to be kinky? I'm not prepared to sacrifice my relationship, but I want the relationship to be more what I want it to be.
Well, what I'm wondering, as I was reading a lot of these questions, am I just too sensitive to the language? Do they really mean, how do I get my girlfriend, how can I get my girlfriend to dominate me? Do they really mean that, or is that just the language that they're using?
No, I
says,
think
I'd like to negotiate something with my girlfriend, how can I approach it? Or are they, you know what I mean? I'm used to a certain kind of language, and I don't like to hear that language, and I don't like to use it, but I don't know that it's so uncommon.
No, I think my opinion from having seen it, I think they really mean it. Like, I think you see these people, and I've seen it from both sides of the power spectrum. How can I get my girlfriend or my, I mostly see it from male or self-identified male dominants who say, how do I get my girlfriend to do blah? Actually, to be fair, I almost always see it from men. Or how can I get my girlfriend to do X to me? Mm-hmm. Because they've been harboring these fantasies. It's really interesting. One of the first books I read about kink was actually the Leatherman's Handbook. And Larry Townsend talks about that, about meeting people who have what he refers to as jack-off fantasies. Meaning they've had this very clear definition of what gets them off and what excites them, and then they get into a relationship and want to make that happen. They want to form the relationship around the fantasy, not create relationships that function in the context of that fantasy. So I think they mean it wholeheartely.
Okay.
But,
and to me, it just seems an approach that is doomed. It's actually, it borders on an unethical way to conduct relationships.
Well, yeah, because the answer is ask them. Right.
The answer is talk about it, not, well, I don't know, and that's shit you read in Cosmopolitan magazine. I don't know, just leave a flogger on the bed some night and see if husband says, hey, what's this? Or pinch his nipples really hard and see if he likes it. What? No, that's not how you do this. It would just be it would be nice to just have a conversation, and I think some of these other methods are a little bit, sometimes people take the wrong approach with it, I guess.
But I don't think you can rule out those people who just, like you said, don't know the language.
Right.
I think there is a small portion of that who just, oh, how can I make this happen? I think there's some people that either just don't know or haven't looked up and realized there's, like, sun outside.
Yeah.
All right, so let's, one of the things that I've told people before, because they've come into the community as a couple, and they've made it clear to me that, actually I've seen it twice recently. One of them said, my girlfriend's not into this, we've talked about it, and it's not her thing. And so she said, go to the Munch and meet people, go fly. And I thought, wow, that is really rare and really cool. And they obviously have a very good sort of communication about this. They didn't fall into that pitfall. They didn't say, we're going to change the dynamics between us because you've discovered something about yourself. So this person has been coming around, and I don't know if they're going to start playing with other people or but it seems like it kept her previous relationship very, very solid. The second example was that of a couple of people that came in and made it clear to me that this is really my idea, and God bless him, he's just kind of along for the ride with me. Like, he wants to make sure that I'm safe here, that this is not a,
bunch of crazy people.
Yeah, rapist, meat market, something, whatever.
A cult.
A cult, yes. That he would like to be into it, and he would, but she was expressing fears that this just may never, this may not be him at all. Yeah. And they had been together for a while, and it was unfortunate because the only advice that I could really give, because she was asking for advice, was, and I was basically saying slow. Slow is good. You don't have to do everything at once. But I think in that case, you have to either allow yourself to have separate relationships outside of the one that you have with him. If this is not him and it is absolutely you, you may have to come to some kind of poly arrangement, some kind of open arrangement. Or the sad fact is that you may have to be prepared to let one go. To say, if this is really you and this is really not him, that you have to be sort of prepared. If you're not prepared to walk away over that, then, maybe you guys aren't equipped, or maybe you should go back to what you were doing, or take it even slower, or come back in a while, or something.
And all of that, though, I have a much greater respect for than somebody who had come to some local events alone and said, my spouse has no idea I'm here.
Sure.
Now, that seems like it's off topic, but I think it's really important because they're basically, like I said, talking about a relationship that they are not even prepared to have that conversation about changing the dynamics or revealing themselves to their partner, which I have some frustration with because ostensibly, being married, you are supposed to be with, your partner for life and honest communication and, be yourself. And you're basically saying, now I've got to lie about who I am and do this stuff behind my partner's back.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth having the conversation.
I guess for me, I think it's unfair, when I look back at the advice that I gave that woman, you have to be prepared to walk away. I don't know, I'm looking back at it saying, maybe I overstated that a little bit, and that might be a little bit harsh, because to me, and what kink is to me, and how important it is in my relationships and my social life and just life interests, is a great deal. But I guess I'm forgetting sometimes that it's not necessarily the whole bowl of wax for everybody. It's something that they'd really like to dabble in. It's like saying, well, I would like to own a sailboat and go yachting all the time. Well, honey, we don't have the money, so we can't.
So we rent a boat once a year and we have a good time.
Yeah, maybe you can do that. But I mean, do they have to be prepared to walk away from that relationship because yachting is off the table? No, they can. Well, but Michael, possibly do without.
I think you raise a really, really interesting point, though. In any vanilla relationship, you see a lot of examples of people who do get so wrapped up in something that doesn't involve their partner. Everything from model trains to fantasy football that creates a wedge in the relationship. And I think kink is worse because it often will involve other relationships, like you said, if they can't come to some mutual agreement on it.
And it can involve relationship dynamics. If I want to get into model trains, it doesn't necessarily have to affect the way that me and my partner relate to each other. It might affect the amount of time that I'm giving them or the amount of attention that I'm giving them, but I'm not talking about rewriting the rule book on how we do our relationship just because I'm into trains. So there is a big difference, I think, and getting involved in kink and understanding, partaking in BDSM and power exchange makes things extremely delicate, in my opinion.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that the chances of success often are related to how important it is to the one partner. like you said, if it's not a terribly important thing, like this would be really cool to try out and kind of dip our toe into because I saw it on, National Geographic Taboo and it kind of sparked my interest. That's one thing versus people who just understand that this is the way that they want to live.
Yeah, and I guess this woman that was asking me for advice, I sensed that she had really sort of found her calling. She was agog in the candy store of, oh my God, people do this, and this is what I've fantasized, thought about, read about, wanted for so long. And we haven't seen them, so I'm assuming that they've split up, but I at least thought maybe we'd see her back then. It's unfortunate because I think, Shane, it sounded like you were sort of taking the opinion that if it didn't work out, well, hey, don't mourn that relationship because it was doomed to fail.
No. But what I was saying, to some extent, yes. But I think, like I said, it's based on how important the interest is to that one partner. Because I don't doubt that there are people who come in, one partner says, I'm interested in this for whatever reason. The other partner says, I'm here because my partner has expressed an interest in it, which I think is great because generally you're talking about people who have had communication about it, which is awesome. Like, that's a great first start. But you might have people who show up and say, I was really interested in this, but, after having heard people sort of talk about it in real life, I don't know that I'm in for all of that.
Right.
And don't come back. Huh?
One of two things happen there. Either the partner who is into it says, okay, baby, we tried. Just as you sacrificed, like basically you were going to try and get into this for my sake, I'm going to give this up for your sake, or maybe they have an agreement beforehand. Hey, if we're not both on board, we're just going to scuttle the whole thing.
Right.
And so they're either going to go back and do what they were doing before, or it's going to fester, and that is, they're not communicating very well. One of them really takes to it and runs away with it, and the other one gets left behind and wants out, and so they grow further apart that way rather than sticking together. And I don't know which one. I think both outcomes are good in their own way, actually.
But I know, because it's happened already, that Josie's going to say, well, what do we do to look at the possibility of having positive outcomes? And I think that the one thing that I would always suggest to people, especially in the context that you were discussing, Michael, where people at least have had the conversation, where everybody shows up, even if it's his partner who says, I'm just here because my partner's into it, the one thing that indicates to me is that they have talked about it, that they have had communication about it. And so my advice,
it says something to me even further good about the relationship.
But I think that what I would say then to that person is, no matter what you decide after being here, no matter what each of you decides is appropriate for you, as long as you keep that discussion going, as long as you're always open with each other, you're going to find it much easier to come to solutions collectively.
Well, I think that flexibility goes a long way, too.
Yeah.
And who's to say if that doesn't, if you keep that discussion open, if it doesn't work now, who's going to say it's not going to work 3, 5, 10 years down the road?
Yeah, and going in with a really specific idea is always going to be harder than going in with a kind of generalized, I'm interested in some trial and error to kind of hash this out. I think that's always going to work better.
Agreed. So are we back to communication again?
Go ahead.
Yeah, we're talking about compromise.
Oh, I thought you had something specific about communication. But yeah, I think that probably everything comes back to communication. I think that that flexibility is probably most important that you mentioned, Josie, because it seems to me like the success stories that I've seen, they've come into this, they've realized some new things about themselves, they agree to give it a go, but they don't have, the same exact picture of what this is going to look like. So you may not be able to get everything that you want. If your idea is to have a live-in wife slave who's chained to the floor and crawls around on all fours and just barks at you instead of talking. If that's your fantasy, if that's the way you want to live, that's asking an awful lot. But, you know, maybe you can compromise on that they're willing to do that sometimes. They're into it sometimes, but not all the time, or under certain
Yeah, and I think, like I
circumstances.
said, it boils down to, I think that negotiating play in vanilla relationship seems to be, from my perspective, from what I've seen, it seems to have a much higher rate of success than negotiating power exchange.
Well, I think keeping in mind that this is not all or nothing. I mean, this black and white all or nothing thing, I mean, if I wanted to grow up and marry Johnny Depp, but I have this great, attractive, employed, nice boyfriend, it's not a loss. I don't then quit men in general because I can't have Johnny Depp for my husband. I mean, that's just stupid.
Well, I would.
I mean, I think it's good not to forget that perspective. People treat this like it's something like insanely complicated and crazy when it's just a relationship decision, just like getting involved with any other kind of partner or getting, trying a different sexual position. They're all, decisions that are of the same family. It just seems more risque because it's different subject matter.
Right, I think I don't disagree, Josie, but the problem that I have, though, and like I said, this is just based on my experience of what I've seen, and I think, to be fair, I think Michael will back this up, is that the difference is that people who come in who express an interest in an existing relationship, very rarely as the person who has that interest, is it a minor or a fleeting interest. Usually it's built up to the point where they've had to talk, they've had to wait and kind of nut up or build themselves up to be able to have that conversation. By the time they do, at least on some kind of emotional level, they have committed themselves at some level themselves to being interested in this. And it's amazing because I've never seen anybody who says, I think I'm kinky, my partner doesn't, and then go, well, I'll just give it up happily.
Right.
I think that's, like you said, it's a festering thing.
It sounds to me, Shane, like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you're saying that what Josie says is right, except that some people have gotten to the point when they come in that it is a deal breaker, that it isn't, it is black and white to them by that point. That I need this in my life, and if I can't have it with this person that I'm with.
No, I wouldn't go that far, Michael. I think the point I'm trying to make is that once they have some exposure, that interest tends to build. I don't think they come in with the black or white attitude, but I think that if they have it in their mind that they're interested, they want to try, and if they have an unsatisfying experience with their existing partner, it tends to reinforce that desire. Like, I think that when you want something that you don't have, that interest is greater. And I think I think unconsciously, at least at the beginning, it just sits there. I just don't think people who have that interest just give it up like, oh, well, okay. Like you said, I read about this position in Cosmo. Well, that doesn't sound very interesting. All right, forget about it. Don't worry about it. And you can let that go.
Some people can. I mean, and Josie's saying it's not black and white for everybody. It depends on how
but I think
important it is to them.
Point where they're coming out to an event, coming out to a munch, or coming out to a party, that they've given it a lot of thought.
Well, sure, but I mean, you still have to maintain that flexibility. I mean, you have to. Introducing any kind of change to any relationship is going to have consequences that everyone is going to have to roll with. Mm-hmm. And if you can't manage that flexibility for both of you, then that may speak to some other compatibility issues that you have. But you need to be prepared that flexibility is going to be necessary, not just for the person who's interested, but for the person who's not as well. There's going to be some trial and error. I haven't heard, and I just would put all my chips to say that, that going about it any other way is just, it's going to fail. I think you have to try it that way.
Yeah, and that's actually the one that's where I see the Hindenburg falling from the sky in a fiery mess.
Oh, the humanity?
Oh, the humanity is right, because what happens, my observations is that when it is the dominant who is the one showing the interest, the one, in a power exchange, they want to be master or mistress, or they want to be the authority or calling the shots. Once they get an agreement, whether it's a hesitant or conditional agreement from the other person that says, okay, well, we'll try this because I love you and you say that this is something that you want and I'll do my best and give it the college try, that there loses then a sensitivity to that person's ongoing opinion about this. And that is, all right, well, you've agreed to be my slave. Now I'm your master. So you have no say. I mean, of course, because that's what being slave means, right? That I'm the boss and you do everything that I say. So now it is going to be everything my way, the way that I want it. And there is no compromise because masters don't compromise. And that sort of working is just a disaster.
But Michael, I want to be fair here. I can think of somebody, and this time I won't try to describe them, but I know somebody who was a submissive, and I don't know if you'd call them a power bottom, who's a female, showed up with her boyfriend who was her dominant, showed up with a collar and a leash, and just dragged that poor boy everywhere. Mm-hmm. Like, come here, come over here and dominate me. Like, these people haven't seen you dominate me yet.
Yeah, but was that guy unhappy? Because maybe that's what their dominance in this
completely indifferent.
Judgmental man.
No, he looked completely indifferent.
Well, if
maybe
it
was
a switch. He wasn't like saying, "I don't want to do this." He was being a good sport about it.
Yeah, they're not together no more.
Whatever. I think
doesn't mean they didn't have a hell of a good time while they were doing it, Shane.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll send you a note about who it was, and you'll have a chuckle.
I probably will. I think this is probably a good time right now to shift gears. We've been talking about, for an hour about vanilla people coming into kink, changing their dynamics from vanilla to kink. But let's talk about existing and established power exchange relationships that now need changing. Because I think there's a whole different set of issues that come up. So someone comes to you one day and says, this dominance thing is just, it's not doing it for me. I don't have the energy for it. I'm in a bad place in my life. I don't have the time. I'm not interested in it anymore. What do you do then? This happens all the time. Can y'all hear me? Yes, we can.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to say hi. I'm sorry I'm a little late and stuff. Cool. I'm just listening for now.
Awesome. So, we can talk about observation, anecdotes of relationships that we've seen where things have changed. But this happens quite a bit, that dynamics change over time. Even people that identify as MS or DS or SM are rarely the same as they were a few years ago. Those dynamics do change, and sometimes it's not even with an explicit agreement. But what happens when they're changing in opposite directions?
Ooh, that's rough.
I think the compromise, the flexibility there is probably also key as well. But we're talking about a couple of different scenarios that can happen. Person A is less excited and wants to incorporate less kink in their life. Person B is not of the same thinking. Or person A is not satisfied with these power dynamics and is gravitating towards a different power dynamic, from master to daddy, or from daddy to top, or something like that. And the other person hasn't changed their feelings about where they would like the power, where they're comfortable having those power dynamics. Do we have to apply the same, like it or lump it, be ready to walk away? Are there compromises that are just too much? Or is that...
My sense of that, in my opinion, is I've seen that work a lot better. I've seen those changes. I'm not saying that they work out every time, but my experience and my sense is that the relationships that I've seen do that tend to have better outcomes. I have seen people transition their relationships to various different styles of power exchange relationships. But again, my perspective is that we're talking about people who have a better sense of language and communication in terms of being able to make that happen.
Is it also is it also maybe because they have they have other models to work from? They've seen this happen before with other relationships in a good or successful or healthy way, whereas folks coming from vanilla don't necessarily have good models to work with.
I think so, but to Josie's point, one of the things that I've seen as well is that people just seem to have a greater degree of flexibility, like saying that I'm going to be, I want to be your baby girl rather than your submissive. I think the dominant partner in that relationship is still able to say, well, that's still a flavor of dominant. So how does the manifestation of that change? We're not really changing who's in charge.
Like two people that changed from daddy girl to master slave.
And back again.
And back again. Or are they back again?
Well, no, they've gone that direction a number of times, yeah.
Well, actually, I agree with you, and that depends probably on one thing, because the difference between, daddy girl and master slave to me has a lot to do with service, in that service looks different to a daddy-girl relationship than it does in a master-slave relationship. And if that is important to one of those partners, if that service and the way that service is carried out is important, then they might not be able to say, well, I'm still in charge, so I can flow with this. Because
Right, and like I said, I'm not saying it succeeds every time.
Right.
I'm just saying I see a greater degree of success than trying to introduce kink into vanilla relationships.
Sure, but I think you pointed out that it probably depends on not just how important power exchange is to the person, but how important specific aspects of that power exchange are.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like this can be almost a harder conversation to have than the, hey, kink exists and I'd like to have some conversation. Because this person knows exactly what you're talking about. If I say, like, I want to have a daddy-girl relationship with you, and they know what it is because they know, it may not be an issue of, oh, well, they can be flexible, it's just a different kind of dominance. It may not be that they don't know what it is, they can't understand it, they can't. It may turn into an issue of, I don't want to. And I feel like that can be even harder than the other conversation, like even more hurtful, because they're just not interested in that way.
Yeah. Am I such a bad slave that you don't want to be my master anymore? You want to be my daddy?
Yeah, and what do you do
or
with
you
that?
Think I need a daddy?
Have I let you down?
Yeah.
You're probably right, especially because we know what, at that point, hopefully you have some language and some understanding of what these different dynamics mean. And what do you do then? I mean, when somebody says, I don't want to be your daddy anymore, I want to be your top, I just want to beat on you,
Well, like I said, to put a pleasant sort of point on this, I think that what you really need to do is discuss what is it you're looking to get out of the relationship. Because when I see somebody who says, I don't want to be a daddy anymore, or I don't want to be a master anymore, what I generally have seen are people who say, I am overwhelmed by the responsibility of the power exchange. I still enjoy the play, I still enjoy the kink, but I just feel like I'm taking on too much by making my own decisions and making your decisions and sort of having to be the kind of constantly the rock in the relationship. And saying, I obviously I still want to be with you, I still want to play, but how do we mitigate some of the responsibility or some of the stress that comes along with the responsibility?
Yeah, and so we're talking about vanilla, when we're trying to change dynamics in vanilla, we were all kind of saying, go in it with flexibility, go in it with a vague idea, but try to stay away from super specifics and like super, super dedicated interest, because that just creates problems. In this sense, when you're talking to someone who you already have a kink-based relationship with, I mean, do you go to them with a bunch of specifics? Because they already know what kink is in general. So do you go with like a laundry list of things you're interested in to kind of get at some of this stuff? Like, I don't just want you to be my dad. Like, I want you to nurture me. I want to have that affection with you. Like, so do you go with that list, or do you still try to keep it real flexible?
I think it's important to identify what's important in the relationship.
and what you feel like you're not getting that you want out of this new dynamic.
So it might be more productive to say to your partner, this master-slave thing that we have going on is giving me trouble, but rather than I want to shift gears and I want to be daddy-girl, for instance, that's specific, or you can get as specific as you want, but is it better than, Josie, you think, to, instead of that, hey, let's change from this, to say, what we're doing isn't working, so how do we change it? You know, like something has.
That sounds like it's got the better chance of success to me.
Yeah.
Okay, something has to change, and I think I'd like to go further this way. But you know, taking off one hat and sticking on another isn't as. That's kind of shocking, and I don't know that that's. I've seen people try to do it, and I don't
really
know
just
that.
Wake up and decide that you want to not be A instead of B. I think there's some
build-up.
Yeah.
Even if you go like 3 months of negotiating with a person, they understand that you're discontent, and they understand that you're having issues with the way that and you want to change the power dynamics more to a certain direction. Even then, to say, okay, well, maybe master slave isn't what we do. Maybe it is daddy girl is what we do. Okay, so we've decided this. So tomorrow, everything changes. Boom. Done. We have a completely different dynamic. I don't think that sounds like it has much of a hope of success either.
I think from what we were talking about, it seems like there's more issues when you're regressing instead of progressing, because you see people all the time go from dominant submissive to master slave, no problem. And maybe there are some issues there, but it's way more common to kind of upgrade from one to the other. And the issues there seem like they're not as prominent as if you're going from what you think are 2 equals or 1 less.
Okay. If you subscribe to the idea that pairs of top-bottom, dominant, submissive, and master and slave are gradations of the same thing, that they are levels, or if you subscribe to that idea, then maybe so. And I don't. I feel very strongly.
I completely agree. I don't think so either. But you see people, oh, well, we've been together this long, so we're not going to be DS anymore. We're going to be MS.
Right. That when people treat it as a gradation, as a scale of how serious we are, or how committed or how involved we are with our kink, I think that causes problems. But I think you're right in that starting small doesn't hurt, and it doesn't matter what you call it. If you're saying, well, let's do this DS thing. I'll be dominant, you be submissive, and maybe someday we'll be master slave. I mean, if that's the way you view it, then I can understand that. I object wholeheartedly to we used to be only dominant and submissive, but now we're more serious, so we've upgraded to master and slave.
Hey, Michael, but let's take it again. What's really interesting here is the language, okay? Because I have seen people who have gone from under consideration to in training to master slave, but I've never seen anyone go back to under consideration.
That's because I think it's common for people to see those echelons, and that's something I would like to get rid of entirely. The fact, and when you're talking about language, because you used the word upgrade was the reason why.
There was the air quotes.
Yeah, there was air quotes.
Yeah.
I don't think that, but a lot of people do.
Well, it's something that I wanted to bring up too, because someone who was, talking about coming and joining us in the community very much had this idea, that, he's a master now, but before that he was just a dominant or just a top. But I agree with the whole sentiment that if you see it in terms of echelons, no matter what the labels are that you apply to it, if you see it in echelons, that starting at baby steps are good, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I feel like you can look at it as gradations, but you can also look at it as levels of commitment. It seems like people who are in master-slave relationships tend to be very committed to each other. They tend to devote what appears from the outside to be a lot of energy and attention to that avenue. So, and it's maybe that they were already on this journey together. So they were already doing the dominant submissive thing, and then they decided to, well, let's just intensify this a little bit more. Like, instead of just doing it sometimes, we're going to do it all the time. And to them, that's the distinction between DS and MS. But I wonder, too, about someone, like, if you're in a relationship with someone who has a slave, who is not you, who is somebody else, and then you would like to go from whatever you are to something else. I wonder if that doesn't also kind of complicate things with trying to change that dynamic, because it becomes this issue of almost like a hierarchy, or like a, if you have to choose where you put your energy, do you put it there first? Do you, how do you distribute that evenly? I think it becomes a different problem.
Right, but this is where I'm going to have to jump in with your own thing about flexibility, because we get that question a lot. With Gypsy being my slave, well, who has more say, you or her husband? Well, because neither of us are dicks, it's really not a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
Not once has it ever got to that point of
master is more important,
as it were. What's that?
Yeah, master is more important than husband, or husband is more important than master.
Yeah, and I think people who make that approach, who draw those frickin' rock hard lines in the sand and say, I am the master and you must do everything I say, or, what, well, I guess we'll break up, I
don't think that changes the fact, though, that it is a lot. I think that it's harder to ask someone to change your relationship dynamic when that person is already involved with someone to that extent. When they've already decided to have that agreement, when they've already devoted that amount of energy to this other person, I think that can make that conversation harder, whether you have the tools or not.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's take another short little plug for the Q&A. I did have one Q&A, one question come in, and but it's a technical question rather than
I can't hear your microphone.
You can't hear my microphone?
No, I'm just saying that was the question.
Right. Now, this particular question was that they wanted to come in and participate, but will their cam suddenly show up and be on display for everybody? If you want to participate, but if you're not sure whether you want to have your face broadcast on Hangouts on Air and then recorded and uploaded onto a YouTube channel, you're probably better off actually disabling your cam at the computer level. Unplug it or disable it before you join, because there might be a split second there where your cam is on, or just put a piece of tape over it until you can actually shut your cam off, and we can just listen to what you have to say.
Can anybody hear me?
We can hear you,
yes.
Susan.
Okay. Hi, everybody.
Hi. And Susan's a good example, because Susan just has her avatar up there, and we can hear her nicely, but we cannot see we know who she is, but
you don't want to see me right now, trust me.
Oh, I doubt that. I am really pleased in this conversation because, in the number of people that are involved here and what I know about your relationships, I have not heard yet, well, all you got to do is go poly and it's all cool, that.
Oh, worst advice ever.
Well, no, what I mean is, sometimes we make this argument, well, if this person isn't into kink anymore, then that's okay. They don't have to be into kink. I can have partners that are other partners that are into kink.
If you want.
We can what?
Oh,
You can
look.
start that conversation if you want.
No, I don't. But considering that, I know myself and Josie and Shane and Megan, and I'm not sure about Paloma, but I know that a lot of us engage in open or multiple relationships, and not yet has that come up. But I think Josie makes a very good point that if you're not already doing that, the idea that, well, hey, we'll just be poly and then we don't have to deal with this issue, I think is a road disaster. Yeah, exactly.
I've got a very close friend right now who is not satisfied with the DS relationship within their marriage, or they don't have a power exchange relationship within their marriage. So they have agreed to go outside of their marriage for power exchange. And it is nothing but a big shitstorm, and I'm having to talk her through it. It just, the duck.
Oh.
It's just, so many things that they haven't talked about that they thought going poly would fix.
Right. That.
And that's why we didn't bring it up.
Our kink relationship is kind of waning, and we're not very, one of us isn't very happy with it. So, you know what? Let's invite other people into it.
Oh, God.
I know.
Or have a baby.
Or have a baby, or get married, or whatever it is you want to do to.
That will always fix things.
Dun dun dun.
So, how about? We're still talking about people that are already in kink relationships. I mean, have we really explored all the possibilities here? I mean, what we do. What about? Let's talk about it in a community sense.
Hey, you know what? There's one though that we haven't talked about, which I find really interesting, and that is bottoms who want to top. We talked about tops who want a bottom and the problems that can cause, but bottoms who find they enjoy topping.
Mm-hmm. Who are you looking at, Shane? I don't know.
I
don't know who you're talking about. Well, for one, the first observation that I've made is that dominance or tops don't necessarily have the same problem with their bottom topping as I've noticed that bottoms generally do with their top bottoming.
Right, but it does still involve a discussion about the wheres, the whys, the how comes,
mm-hmm.
so that there's clarity in why this is happening.
Okay.
I don't expect to do that to you.
Well, no, but I mean, I think that's fair, right? Which is, okay, well, I think that's a fair discussion to have as long as you understand that this discussion doesn't include me
mm-hmm.
as the partner for that experiment.
Right. You can talk if you want, but you don't get to practice on me. You're right. It shouldn't be taken as a given. That is something that needs to be said up front.
Yeah.
And part of a good conversation. Can we say why it is that it seems to be? I mean, I know there are exceptions to this, but why does it seem to be more okay for a bottom who wants to top rather than the other way around, as far as their existing power exchange dynamics? So if my slave sees me submitting to someone else, they might lose something for me. How is it that I don't lose something for my slave if they're dominating someone else?
Unfortunately, I can only speak from my own experiences, which I trust in my power exchange. I know that my relationship, now to be fair, and in the interest of full disclosure, we are talking about a situation in our case where we are poly, and poly was already established. So we're not talking about adding an element that wasn't already there or whatever else. So that discussion's a lot more fluid in terms of saying, I would like to try doing this stuff, or I've done this and I enjoy it and I want to do more of it, right? It goes out, it's being directed out. You say, okay, as long as it's not me, I'm cool. But in terms of the trust, if the relationship is solid enough that you're already in a good poly situation and you trust the relationship, then at least in my case, I just trusted the power exchange, that I knew that it wasn't going to affect our power exchange.
Okay. And that is a function of you being poly. I mean, if you weren't, if you and Megan were monogamous together and she wanted to top, well, then there's really only one option for you at that point, isn't there?
Well, yeah, and I don't disagree with that, but in practical terms, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that desire to top sort of grew organically from the opportunities to do it. Mm-hmm. So if not presented with the opportunities to do it, I don't know that interest would have flourished the way that it did. So it's not like she woke up one day and said, I feel like topping, right? Mm-hmm. She was asked to participate in some stuff, found she really enjoyed it, and it grew from there. And so it was never a, I feel like topping, you're going to have to do this or we're done. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I think that is an interesting thing. And I feel like a lot of times it happens, with this, why is one seem to be okay, but the other seems to create more problems. I feel like a lot of times that happens when it's a male dominant and a female submissive who then wants to be a female dominant to other female submissives, and it's really similar to that whole thing where men are totally cool with their girlfriend going out and like making out with other girls but not other guys. It's this very bizarre.
I don't know.
Right? It's this very bizarre kind of double standard, and you can't really say why it is, but I feel like it's really similar to that. And
Well,
the
we
only
did
thing
a
I can
discussion.
think. Sorry?
We talked about that. We did a poly class. We talked about that. It's called the one dick policy.
Right. Yeah, and it's really similar to that, and I can't even speculate on why that is, other than maybe that for a male dominant and a female submissive in that situation, like I think maybe they just assume it's going to be a female with a female, and that's what makes it okay.
So they're all for it because they know that she's going to bring some hot chick home to them, and they can
but to be fair, though,
I think that's an assumption a lot of the time.
My experience, I will speak to my experience, is that those experiences were always outside of the relationship, meaning there was no expectation that this was going to include me at all.
Right.
So I want to kind of, at least from my own perspective, squash that side of it. But the discussion has been had about what if it was a male partner, and from our perspective, the I don't know, the guidelines around it are the same.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I think Josie's talking about a stereotype that's true.
Right, and I agree with you. I agree that
and,
stereotype is there. So I'm only speaking from my own perspective, or my own situation.
Right. So generally, when the dominant, the good old boys club gets around and they're like, yeah, my slave wants to top people, they'd be like, high five, man, way to go.
Right.
Hey, but Josie, you know what's an interesting dynamic around that as well, though, is that one of the reasons that dominant males in some cases are okay with that, even with a male submissive partner, right? So my female submissive has
your ego.
Well, I think that
now you're not just topping a submissive, you're topping someone who tops other people, so that makes you even more of a badass top.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
You want to say it? We'll just pretend and say that.
Your lips to God's ears.
I agree with that, Josie. There is something to that. There is, a feeling of, well, and not only that, but if you are the person in control and you know that you can end that at any time, okay, that if you're not happy with the way things are going and you have control over that relationship, what is there to fear? Whereas when you are the submissive and suddenly your dominant is now being controlled by someone else, I suppose that could be very scary. Much scarier than when you're sitting in the driver's seat.
In terms of how much power you have, not value, obviously, power you have in the relationship. If the dominant has 100% and the bottom has 0%, if I go and do this, it's not going to affect any part of that 0% because I don't have any power to lose. But if that person that's holding 100% of the power goes out and does something, it might reduce it down to 80% or down to 70%.
Or worse, that the person that they're now under, whose authority they're now under, suddenly you're beholden to them somehow, or they're
you're giving some of your power to them.
Yeah, or they're going to dom you by proxy.
Yeah.
Where suddenly some other dom is going to be managing your dom about how to manage you.
Mm.
I mean, I will tell you,
conflicted interest.
Dealing on a personal level, I guess the reason that I don't have an issue with it is that I know nothing comes between my power exchange relationship with Megan, and I will say that the one relationship that I have said that I'm not going to be okay with had nothing to do with gender. It had to do with power orientation. I won't let her submit to another dominant. Mm-hmm. And it's not an issue of jealousy. It's not a one penis kind of thing. It's simply that I have a style of education and so what I'm looking for, molding, I guess, that I just don't want fucked with.
Guidance, yeah.
Sure, guidance. I'm just manipulating in particular ways to get what I want. I don't want that fucked with.
Right.
I mean, I can't put any more plain than that.
Yeah, but if you're submitting to anybody, doesn't that put the other person in a default dominant position?
Yeah, I'm not talking about the dominant submitting. I'm talking about the relationship where my submissive could be in other relationships. If she was a dominant to somebody else, that's okay, and I don't care about gender.
Oh, you would want her submitting to anybody in general.
male or
okay.
female.
Okay.
Bottoming for play, she's bottomed to men and women before. I'm okay with that. Submitting, no.
Okay.
Yeah. I have the same sort of sticking point that Shane does. That people that I'm involved in, that I've agreed to be dominant or master to, that it has much less to do about gender if they want to play with somebody, and it has everything to do with which power orientation they're going to assume.
Both the girls have bottomed to other people, male and female. They don't submit to other people.
Right. And sometimes it's under your supervision or control.
But that's an interesting one, though, Michael, because if you're talking about differences in power exchange, having a submissive say, I want to submit to somebody else, because I have seen that. Mm-hmm. I've seen where people who are submissive in some form of a power exchange relationship, daddy-girl, who take on a master.
Right.
That just that's the one that messes with my head. If somebody said, I want to submit to somebody else, that would be a much different conversation. My level of flexibility is going to be decreased dramatically in that instance.
And is there a way that person could approach you to make that easier to stomach or easier to have the conversation about? Or is that just kind of a hang-up in general no matter how they say it?
Well, hold on. We're talking about a context, okay? And what's really important about that is if somebody said, I want to submit to somebody else, I'm coming in way too late in that game. So I'm coming in at a place of, wait, when did this happen? And why am I hearing about this now?
So when should they go to you? When was the optimum moment for them to have said something to you? That's a really interesting point.
Yeah, because they're telling you now.
Right, I know, but my point I'm trying to make, though, is if somebody wants to submit to somebody else, it means that a relationship has been in the works that I'm only finding out about then.
Well, and maybe it's what if it's just an interest? Like, I was thinking about the other day, like, wouldn't that be kind of hot, or wouldn't that be kind of interesting?
I think what Shane is making a distinction here between submitting to somebody and wanting to play with them or serve them in some way. He's talking about giving themselves to another person. Yes?
Yeah. I mean, on a more sort of relationship basis, yes.
That'd be on a more established relationship already.
Correct.
Sure.
A more clearly defined long-term relationship.
And what Shane might be saying is, how come if you want to submit to this person, I didn't even know that you had a crush on them? Why haven't we had that conversation yet?
Can I say something?
Go ahead, Paloma.
Okay, my thoughts on that is, what if this person happened to have an interest in the other person, and things fell through after they had told you about said person, and then it was all for nothing. So maybe they were checking to see if that person was good for the long term. I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Vetting them before they bothered to bring it up.
Well, can I say something, please?
Please do,
yep.
Sue.
Well, my thought on that is if somebody came to just say, like they came to my master and they said, okay, I would like her to submit to me as well. Doesn't that already mean that there has been some kind of set type of relationship or dynamic that's already been set between those two people? I don't see how you can. I mean, yeah, I know people that have more than one dominant, and yeah, but I think that to get to that point, there already has to be an established relationship, not an interest.
The question from Josie, I guess, is there's a continuum of progression here, and at what point is it necessary to you, Shane, or to you, Sue, to have that discussion? Is it at
what point would that make the conversation easier for someone who's in that situation, as the person who they're going to be coming to ask for this change? Is there a point that for you is the optimum time that would make it easier for you to have that discussion versus something that would piss you off, like after the fact, like, hey, I met this guy, I think we're going to do this.
Well, I think it better happen early on. I mean, if I was the dominant, I'd better have that conversation when the interest first started, not 2-3 weeks, a month, 6 months down the road. I want to know about it right away.
Shane, do you
But
have
I'm
an
not
opinion?
a dominant,
Shane, do you
but
have
I'm
an
not
opinion?
a dominant, so.
When you say right away, at what point are you referring to? Because if I see some dude on the street and I'm like, ooh, that guy's cute, what am I supposed to do? Go run to my dom slash boyfriend slash
But
whatever?
that's not getting into a dynamic, a dominant submissive, a master slave dynamic. That is just interest in two people, which to me are two totally different things.
Right, but it seems like to me one of y'all said that the second that the interest was known, the other person should know as well.
Well, I think if you go to a bar and you meet somebody and they want to give you their phone number so you can contact them tomorrow, I don't think it's out of the ordinary to be like, hey, I was at the bar tonight and I met this guy.
Right.
That's right off the bat. You're not keeping any secrets from anybody. Your communication is going to be better because you're like, oh, well, if they're honest enough with me to tell me about this up front, then clearly there's no ulterior motives or anything that's still going on.
Right. And people have to decide for themselves, in their relationship of when that point is. If Shane has ideas about, he wants to know as soon as you start having this kind of feeling for the person, or he wants to know if you have, outside of public contact, like it's somebody at events or someone in the community, if you're messaging on FetLife or email or phones or something like that. You guys have to be, have an understanding of when your place is that you require that kind of communication. And we talk about this in the poly community as well, when you're bringing in new partners, and nobody likes to be blindsided by a partner.
Exactly.
But when is the point that you start treating somebody differently from a casual acquaintance to somebody that you're interested to? Because it isn't always necessarily aha moments of when these things, you can't put your finger on it. This is when it changed from some guy I knew to some guy I was interested in at this moment.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering how the timing affects that change. So specifically, if I'm your slave, and I want to come to you and say, I'm interested in changing this relationship dynamic in that I would like to submit to someone else. Is there a time that I had that conversation with you as my master that would make it an easier conversation, or is it just across the board empirically a really difficult conversation for you to even stomach?
Well, I think the conversation is difficult, but it's always going to be easier earlier.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Transparency.
Right. Let me throw a wrench in this one. What if your partner is saying that I want to submit to someone else or I want to dominate someone else, but I don't know who that is yet? I haven't.
That's an easy conversation. That's much easier for me.
I think that's much better because then you'll see it coming later on.
I would have a much harder time with that conversation, and I'll tell you why. Yes, because I can understand when my slave or submissive or somebody that I have authority over says, I met a wonderful person or somebody that I find very attractive or has qualities that I admire, and I'm feeling submissive to this person, I have a much easier time stomaching that than I want to submit to somebody else. I'm not sure who, but not you. Like, I already submit to you, but I know that I want something else. I just don't know what yet. It tells me that something's missing. Not that they saw something that they are, might be interested in, but that they're having some kind of wanderlust or,
Opposite for me. Like, this person must be better than you, or, this is just a lingering thought that I may want to try out.
Yeah, I'm much easier with the concept than having it specifically related to somebody.
But it flies in the face of my idea that, when people go out looking for certain kinds of relationships, we've talked about this in past Kink times, when you say, I would like to find a submissive. Well, we agree, or we have agreed, that you're doing it wrong. That you get relationships and you put people.
Talked about going to the munch looking for something specific.
Oh God.
Right? That's not the same thing as somebody who's coming in new. I think if you are at a point of self-discovery where you realize that this is something that you're interested in, because I think to a large extent that's the discussion that we had, right? Where she said, I've really been enjoying topping, and I think I'd like to be able to do this more often. I don't necessarily know with who, but I think this is something that I would really enjoy. Cool, great conversation. Let me know if you find somebody. Let's talk.
Yeah, and I think expressing
keep on the hunt for a specific person. It means she's identifying an interest.
Okay, but Shane, we're not talking about her wanting to top someone else. We're talking about, in this case, they want to submit to somebody else, which is something that they already do with you, and they don't know who with yet. They just know that they want to submit to somebody else. Doesn't that
I've had that conversation.
Okay.
And what I've seen is when you look at the different types of, again, if you don't look at things as an upgrade, if you look at things as different, right, as being separate, so that, like, master-slave is not above, dominant-submissive, that these are completely different tracks. One of the things that I've talked to, actually, was Gypsy about the idea of having a trainer for her pony stuff, right? Because it's not necessarily a particular kink that I have the same level of interest in that she does.
Okay.
Well, I feel like I think you're just you're planting the seed. I mean, you're just saying, not necessarily that you're shopping for someone to submit to, but like you feel the craving, like you want to, you just feel it. It's just a feeling that you had that was kind of a fleeting thing. I don't think it necessarily means that you're shopping.
Okay.
I think it might just be preparing you for a future conversation in which you might
meet.
And
to be fair, it never happened. But you're right. It was much easier to hear. I don't want to say to brace myself in that sense, but just to be aware of it, just to know the person better.
All right. We have some more on this topic. There wasn't, about kink relationship, changing power dynamics in existing kink relationships. What happens when you're just growing apart? Your kinks are growing in different directions. Not, hey, I want to fine tune this. Like, I still want this relationship with you, but I want to kind of branch out and I want to do other things with other people. That's a different conversation than, I don't feel submissive to you anymore. What can you do in that situation? I mean,
leave.
Is that the only option?
I don't think so.
Do you look for other ways to manifest your relationship, or to, like, categorize your, we used to have it in, like, category B, but this doesn't fit anymore, so we're going to move it into category F.
I've tried to do, we were talking a little bit before about MS and Daddy Girl, for instance. We were just using those as examples. That, most people would agree that they're very different dynamics and they encompass different things. That if that's the way, that I think to me it matters. The relationship that I have with a person is more important than the dynamics that I have with them. And so for me, especially being open to multiple relationships and being able to have other things with other people, I do have it unfairly easy, but the person is more important to me than the dynamics. So if somebody said to me, I just don't feel submissive to you anymore, or I don't feel like you're my daddy anymore, that doesn't mean that we have to stop having a relationship. In fact, I would be willing to flex and change on that relationship all the way up to and including vanilla. If they said, kink isn't where it's at for me, I thought I was into it, I'm changing as a person. I've had people do that before, where I used to be into pain and something happened and I'm not anymore. So I don't want to play.
I don't recall if you said that you were poly or whatever, but sorry, it was an impulse for me to say just leave. I wasn't really serious when I said that. I think that in that case, it would be a good situation to look in the area of poly, having a vanilla relationship, and then having a submissive dominant relationship. So, that you can work through it, but yeah.
Okay.
I think if you put that on the flip side, where the other person is saying, I like the relationship that we had, but I need the dynamic to be important. That to them, they're saying they need that dynamic. And if that person is saying, I'm not interested, or I don't think I can do that for you, I think more often than not, the answer to that probably is that they leave if there's no option to explore that in other places. Or even if they can explore in other places, I think the option a lot of times that I have seen has been for them to leave because their feelings are so hurt at that point that the relationship suffers in the absence of the dynamic that they want.
What's interesting, Michael, is that your observation there is specifically related to some stuff that you had said, which is in your relationships, the relationships matter more than the power exchange. Mm-hmm. So from our perspective, I will tell you that the power exchange is the relationship. It's what fuels the relationship. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you this right now, and she's sitting right next to me. If you know, you can watch her expression, see if I'm lying. She's not my girlfriend. Mm-hmm. She's not ever going to be my girlfriend.
And he's not my boyfriend.
Right? She is my submissive. That is the way our relationship is. Mm-hmm. And if that, and we are poly, if that function of the relationship isn't there, from our perspective, and again, this is just us, we understand that you have a different set of circumstances, then our relationship doesn't function. And I'd really like to bring up sort of a variance of what you were saying, which is my biggest concern actually is when complacency steps in and that power exchange does start to slip. Mm-hmm. That is something that we are really vigilant about, because if it does slip, it's really hard to restart.
That's a really good topic to bring up, because I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons that existing power exchanges. I was at it was a class that I was in when I was up in Cincinnati at Fear Fest, and the author Laura Antonou was there doing. I don't remember what the name of the class was, but it was the statement that she made was, the number one reason kink relationships fail, people stop playing. That's what happens. People stop playing. Now, that rings true for a lot of people, and that rings true. It's the sort of vanilla counterpart to people stop having sex. That once the sex is over in a marriage or in a vanilla relationship, then you're kind of on your way out. And she feels that way about kink relationships. Now, I don't agree with that to the letter. I think that the sentiment is, well meant and applies to a lot of people. It depends on how important play is to you. But for those who are service-minded or those who are DS-minded, instead of using the word play, let's say people stop honoring their dynamic. And
I think that's the best way to put it. I think that at least in our particular case, I will tell you up front that we had, at least initially and now literally, a contract, for lack of a better term, of understanding about what our relationship is going to look like. And it's important enough to us that we've discussed that what does our style of power exchange look like, and how does it manifest itself? Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's important here to look at, okay, so you've agreed and you have equal understanding of the expectations of what your relationship is going to be. How important is it for it to stay that way? You know what I mean? People maintain, try hard to, as you were saying, we're very vigilant about not letting vanilla creep set in, where we are what we are, and we're vigilant to keep it that way. But sometimes I think changes are necessary, and I
don't disagree with that. I think that one of the things that we've come to the conclusion, at least internally, because these are discussions we've actually had, which is as long as we understand that the power exchange is there and sort of what direction it flows and to what extent, there's a great deal of flexibility in terms of how it manifests itself, but that's the one thing that doesn't change.
Right. So the power exchange between you and Megan is a deal breaker. If that's not there, then you kind of have to step away.
Well, let her answer.
Yep, right. It is. Because when I got into a relationship with him, I didn't want a boyfriend. I wasn't looking for a boyfriend. I was looking for a dominant. And for me, if that's not there, what's really the point of continuing that relationship? Now, that sounds really cold, but, if I'm looking for that, and if that's if that's what I need out of a relationship, then not getting that is really a disservice to myself. So you got to be selfish.
But again, to the clear communication, we both understand that, and we don't. It's not that we just understand it. We have discussed it. Like, we are on the same page.
Right. Are you allowing for some room to grow or change on that? So, for instance, Megan, you know Shane a lot better now than you used to. And I imagine you have a higher sense of fondness for him that maybe you did when you first met. Is there a point where the relationship, you have decided that power exchange is essential, otherwise why bother? You agreed to that and understood that from the beginning. Why can't that change? Why?
And I think, Michael, our answer to that collectively, and she's here so she can answer for herself as well, but having discussed this, I think our answer to that collectively is that our relationship flows from the power exchange. It is how we relate to each other.
Okay.
And
so
without that, we don't relate to each other the same way. So you say, over time you have become more fond, but to be fair, our power exchange and our trust for each other in that power exchange has deepened. And It's sort of more of a betrayal of that understanding if that goes away.
Yeah, and I guess what I was asking was, what if you found that your feelings for the other person started flowing from a different place as well as the power exchange?
So just a pure, I love you as a person, not as my dominant kind of thing?
Well, you start loving a person more in a girlfriend-boyfriend way as well as a dominant and submissive way.
I can see what you're saying. I just know in our particular case that's not what, we've had many discussions about that. And I can say this from a practical sense because there have been times when I have been unable, like Batman, to be the dominant the city needs. Mm-hmm. Due to injury or whatever, where, essentially Megan stuck it out because she understood what I was and what the relationship was, but understood that there were elements that we would have had to put on hold.
Okay. Well,
but there was never an understanding that, okay, well, we'll just be boyfriend-girlfriend.
Okay. Well, for us, it's not an option. I want to thank you guys for allowing us to get personal for a bit because we don't normally do that. We talk about, relationships that we know of, or things that we've seen, but it's pretty rare that we actually, talk to people directly about more personal questions about their power exchange and kink relationships. So
I kind of like it. If I can give insight to somebody or help someone else's relationship, then why not?
But in saying that, though, Michael, and having gotten personal, I think it's fair, especially if people are going to be watching this and reviewing this, I'd like to say this for their benefit. This is how we do our kink, and it doesn't apply to everybody. Mm-hmm. Right? This is how we have arranged our... Huh?
Well, I was just saying, I think it's a great example, though, of a really, showing a lot of trust in your relationship and also just having really healthy, clear boundaries, which I think there's not a lot of great examples of, either because, people just aren't really vocal about them or people don't notice them as a boundary, but that's kind of what I'm seeing them as, and I think it's a really nice example. I really appreciate you talking about it.
Yeah, and I think what I'm getting out of this segment of the kink tank conversation is that when people are clear about their expectations and people understand each other's expectations of what I mean when I say master slave or what I mean when I say daddy girl, that things work much better. But I think the reason why things change in relationships isn't necessarily laziness, doms stop being doms and subs stop being subs, but it is a change of expectations in one or more of the partners, in that you grow together, you grow apart, you gain something or lose something for the person, and I guess it's when expectations change is when you start having these power dynamic changes. I mean, is it fair to say that those accompany each other? Are those almost the same thing when we're talking about changing power dynamics equals changing expectations?
I think they are.
Okay, so when you're clear about your expectations, and as Shane said, he's not open as much to those expectations changing. This is what we agreed to, and this is what we're going to do, and we're going to be vigilant about doing this because this is
Right, but to be fair,
we
like I
need.
said, that's specific to power exchange. Again, how that power exchange manifests itself.
It might even be specific to Megan. You know, I'm not saying that's like your philosophy and that's how you do everything.
Well, to be fair, for me, it kind of is.
Mm-hmm.
But whether you know, at any given point, you know, Megan is my baby girl, my submissive, my slave, my puppy, my whatever that language is, and however that manifests itself. Like how we relate to each other on a day-to-day basis may change, but what doesn't change is our relative position of authority.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
That's what we've agreed to. So we do have flexibility in there. We do have the ability, and like I said, I mean, part of that is, you know, her saying, I want to top, at least from that perspective. We haven't got to the point where she said, I want to be someone's dominant, but certainly the idea for her own interest, what she likes in terms of wanting to perform certain activities from the top, we've had that discussion, and it doesn't affect our power exchange at all.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because we understand how we relate to each other, you know, yesterday and how we relate to each other today, and what she's interested in, it doesn't affect that power exchange. So we have lots of flexibility in that.
Okay, but
I think that probably stands.
Go ahead, Josie.
Well, I think it deserves to be said too that, I mean, I think that what it looks like can change even if your expectations don't. I mean, my expectation from you may still be that I just want you to love me, but what I want that love to look like could change, and that's what changes the dynamic. Mm-hmm. So I don't think they're necessarily mutually exclusive from the statement you made right before Shane was talking.
Mm-hmm. About expectation, changing expectations equals changing power dynamics.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, it's really important for me to be clear that this is what we do. This is what we got into, knowing it and having really regular checkpoints about it, understanding that we're still on the same page that way. Mm-hmm. You know, and this is 2 years later.
Right.
But we communicate about it. You know, I know what's going on with her, and she knows what's going on with me.
Yeah, and I wonder sometimes, you know, and we haven't been talking much about poly and multiple relationships, and I think that's good because that doesn't apply to everybody in kink. It just, we happen to have a sort of a cross-section of more open people maybe on this panel. But it does make a difference to me. It makes it, as much as poly opens up a different can of worms and a different set of problems that I'm willing to deal with and work on, it is one thing that simplifies other dynamics in my relationships. And that is, so I'm looking, you know, at Shane and Megan, for instance. He's saying if she wants to top somebody, we can talk about it, and it's cool. But he also said if she wanted to top me, that would be a problem. Now, if you two are monogamous, and like me and someone that I'm involved with, and we're monogamous and we've agreed that we don't have play partners outside of each other and we don't have lovers and we don't have intimacy outside of each other, when that power dynamic changes and they say, I want to top somebody, well, that either has to be me, or we're going to have to open up, or we're going to have to call it quits. Because, you know, if I'm not willing to budge on that, there are no other options. So it makes it a little easier for me when my partners come to me with needs, and I can say, well, that sounds good. Go find somebody to do that with. You know, it's not going to be me. But if you were in a monogamous relationship, I think I would probably I would find more deal breakers, I guess, because everything has to be done with me, and there are some things that I can't abide. I can abide if they want to go find someone else to do those activities with. So does it make a big difference to you? I mean, monogamous people, I think, have it maybe a little tougher in that regard. Any comments? I
think they're a little bit more locked into what they have. You know, I think one of the points that Josie made is that, you know, one of the things that makes this shifting power exchange happen is a certain amount of personal flexibility. And I think monogamy has a certain limiting factor on flexibility.
Yeah,
I think the box is still maneuverable. It's just a smaller box. How about that?
Yeah, so a lot of options for solutions seem to be taken away there. But you know, some people say, well, that's perfectly cool because poly would just, open up Pandora's box of shit that would destroy us anyway. So we're
right,
better
but to
off.
be fair, though, Michael, I do want to say the one thing about monogamy, though, that is at issue is that when you get into a monogamous relationship, you understand that you are giving things up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That is a function of that relationship. And as much as, Megan and I will say that we don't have any flexibility in our power exchange, I think it's fair to say we're getting into this monogamous relationship understanding that we are choosing to give up flexibility. Meaning I can't go after the girl with the hot tits. You can't go after the guy with the
hot tits.
Yeah, right? But all those things, like if you are monogamous with someone who's bisexual, you are basically saying you don't get to be bisexual as long as you're with me.
Yeah, and I think it's
Some
definitely
people would disagree
harder.
with that.
No, Michael. You either allow partners or you don't.
Yes, but that doesn't mean, I guess it's the way that you phrased it. I'm not allowing you to be bisexual. They're bisexual whether they sleep with men, women.
They're kinky, whether they're
Both.
practicing it or not, Michael. They're
Both or
top,
neither.
whether they're practicing it or not.
It was just the way that you phrased it. It's wasn't very PC.
Well, no, but that's okay, because the point I'm trying to make is if somebody comes to me in a monogamous relationship and says, I want a top, while you're not topping me, guess what? You don't get to be a top. That's what I'm saying. No matter how bad you're feeling it, no matter how true or how much conviction you have in that feeling, you don't get to do it.
Right, but you're defining the label top by your actions. If you're not topping somebody, then you're not a top.
No, I'm saying to the same point of being a lesbian or to being bisexual, if you say, I'm not going to let you do that, I am not going to let you do the activity that
Act upon it.
that defines that.
Right.
You're no less a top because you don't get to do it.
Right. So somebody who's in a monogamous relationship, somebody who's bisexual, who's monogamous in a relationship with another gender, is still bisexual. We agree?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but a
It's just the
person
way
who's in a monogamous relationship who doesn't get to top their partner is still a top.
Right. And that is
You're like a dog with a bone. Just let it go.
Well, I want to be. She's talking about me, but I want to be clear because I think that's an important distinction. And you're saying, Shane, that by being monogamous, you are giving up some things. I think you give up things in poly relationships as well. You're giving up exclusivity. You're giving up a bit of your time. You're giving up a lot of things.
If you don't want to give anything up, just be single.
Yeah.
Or if you want to give everything up, just be single. You could look at it that way.
Yeah. What's more important?
Anyways, we won't get too far into the mono-poly thing past that, but
Hey, don't be hating on the single folk.
yeah, nobody's hating on anybody.
I think it's just that I think we're agreeing that it's probably a little harder for monogamous people, but I still think that with even someone who's poly, if you have a person who is resisting that change, I mean, like, so if you're saying that the relationship is more important to you than the dynamic, but that person is telling you that, you can't just treat it like it's a magic bullet, even if you're already in a poly relationship. You can't just say, like, well, that's cool. You want a daddy? Go find one. Because if what that person is trying to say is, I would like to have that with you, there's not really a substitute for you. There's,
Sure.
So it's still not a magic bullet, even if you are poly. I just want to make that distinction also. It's a bad solution if you're monogamous. It's a just as bad of a solution if you're poly.
I have a great analogy for that later if anybody wants to hear it.
Okay. Well, and I take your point, Josie, in that being poly presents options for this kind of thing, but they're not always good options. So,
right. Exactly.
For instance, you want to change into a daddy thing, and I'm saying, no, that's not, I can't, I won't. I'm weird about it. I think it's weird. No, hard limit. Then I guess your answer is, if that's what you want, you'll have to have it with someone else. But and that would still cause because if what you want is a specific dynamic with a specific person, then that can still cause problems, and it may end up being a deal breaker in the sense of, this is how I see you and this is how I treat you, and if I can't express that or be that to you, then I don't feel like our relationship is, what's the word I'm looking for, functional or good for me anymore.
Thriving.
That may happen as
Thriving?
thriving. All right. Anybody have anything to add? I wanted to check my Q&A here real quick, and it looks like
good crowd. That's what I like to say. Good crowd.
we've cleared out. Yeah, I agree. We've had to clear out. We've gotten most of the questions cleared out. We did two kink tanks in 2 weeks, and that was just to offset our Thursdays a little bit, and now we are going to start going back to every other week. So every other week, I guess, puts us on October 30th will be the next. That wraps up another episode of the Kink Tank. We hope you got something valuable out of it and will tune into our future episodes. You know what? Just make it easy on yourself and just subscribe to our channel using the button on your screen so you can get all of our finished episodes as well as our live event listings. Also, if you liked what you saw, why not leave a thumbs up or try one of our other previous videos linked to on your screen. We appreciate all the feedback for any of our episodes in the comment sections on YouTube or at any of the social media sites that you see listed on your screen. We'll see you again in about 2 weeks, so remember in the meantime to kink often and kink safe.